We do have John here if you can hear me.
Fabulous. There you are. John, so lovely to see you again.
You too. Great to be here. Thanks.
And are you dialing in from sunny Los Angeles?
Well, I'm a little north of Los Angeles in a small town called Carpinteria, and it's not so sunny here. We have marine layer, but it's still California nonetheless.
Oh my gosh, no complaints. I don't want to brag, but here on the East Coast in New York, it is a beautiful day for once. We're on the upside of that weather discussion. Fabulous. Well, why don't we jump right in? So I am personally super excited for this panel. It's something I, think and talk about every day, it feels like. Where is the future of HR tech going? How does AI contribute to that? Where do you see kind of the technological trends taking us? And I'm also really excited to introduce you personally to our community. We got a chance to catch up in person about 3 months ago now, and have been blown away by your experience and what you're doing. So I thought, why don't we start with maybe a quick intro? You've led HR at some of the fastest growing and most interesting companies. But would you mind, John, give us a bit of background on you and what you're up to now?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've had some really lucky experiences in my life with companies that I guess people are familiar with. Along the way, I can share some of those, but more recently, over the past 5 or 6 years, I've been trying to work with emerging tech and emerging companies in any way I can. So I operate as an independent under the guise of Gamut Labs. And I'm really interested in systems change and helping startups develop. I'm also really interested in helping companies like Diversio grow their product. And so I kind of have my hands on a lot of different things right now.
Very cool. And maybe walk us through some of the companies that you've worked with.
Well, early in my career, I think my story around diversity and inclusion starts working for the YMCA even earlier. I worked in nonprofit adolescent development with kids and community building early in my career. Then I moved into corporate and I worked with Citibank. I've worked with Fidelity Investments, Levi Strauss and Company, all very large multinationals where I was working in organization development. And then I made a big shift about, 10 years ago or so, and I started working with a company called IDEO, which is a much smaller innovation consultancy, global company, but really focused on getting the most out of their teams. And I'd say that's where I saw the power of diversity at its highest order. And then I've been working in startups since then, including companies like Hulu, TrueCar, Thrive Market, a lot of different kinds. Some of my experiences with startups are multi-years, like 3 to 4 years, and some are really short, like 3 to 6 months. Depends on the situation.
Yeah, amazing. And I think, companies are at different stages of their journey. This is a new topic for a lot of folks. And so the scope of that engagement, I'm sure, would vary. One thing that I think is so interesting about your background, John, and where I love your perspective, you've really had a career that's run the gamut, no pun intended. Working at companies, big ones, small ones that started small, became large. How have you seen diversity and inclusion evolve as a priority?
Well, I guess it kind of depends on the company itself in terms of where they are. I mean, if I go back to, Citibank, large multinational companies, in my opinion, are a lot more diverse than a lot of the smaller tech companies I've been around. And I sort of, if you think of it as a sort of a 4-box thing, if you have a founder in a small company that has a more eclectic background or non-traditional kind of start, I feel like they're more committed and understand the power of diversity from the beginning. Those that haven't been exposed to the power of being around all sorts of different types of people, I think are a little stuck. And so they're actually the hardest ones to work with. So I think my evolution has been start with the people that already understand the power, because convincing others isn't easy. I'm actually migrating more and more towards bigger companies again, because as you're pointing out with data, and this is a macro problem. And when you have a public company that has a board that cares deeply about all the different other types of risk and opportunity that you described so well earlier today, they're just going to move faster. So I've kind of gone from working in big companies is too hard because they're too slow, to flipping back to big companies that are on the leading edge, I think, right now of some of these things. So I think over time.
And that really, I think, tees up nicely the next question around momentum. And we've seen it shift, and who's the target of that momentum and who's along for the ride is really evolved. But give me like your 5-year view. Like, how have you seen? What's the trend been in DEI? Has that momentum been smooth? Has it been choppy? What's your retrospective?
Well, I mean, there's been two significant things in the 5-year frame, I guess, which is like a blink at this point. I think one is just the power of technology, and we're getting, and diversity is right on top of that. When you can now, even 5 years ago, probably more like 10, HRIS systems were pretty clunky and really didn't work. And I'm old enough to have lived through the transition from paper files to actual, master records that you can tag and sort and find patterns in. And I think that's a significant factor in the momentum, is we can actually see patterns in data that we couldn't uncover before. So technology is one of them. The other one, I think, is just the rise of social justice as a factor in business strategy. And consumers have more power over who they're buying from and what they're buying and what the companies are like. And I think that's made itself very clear over the past 5 years. So company boards and executives, I think, are more accountable to the way they operate than they ever have been in history. So I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, definitely some positive trends there. And what do you think, what do the next 5 years hold? Do you see the momentum continuing? Do you think consumers will continue to care? Will they continue to have that power? What's your view there?
Well, honestly, like we go through these, there's a point where people start to resist as well. I mean, this is such a macro issue, but for me, what's always been true in my work, and I really come from an inclusion background. Everything I did early in my career was about creating teams that thrive by treating each other with respect. And, a company I worked with called Pecos River Learning had a model called the TASTE model, which was truth, accountability, support, trust, and energy. And so those are values that lead to human relationships that are deeper. And so to me, that's what inclusion really is seeing people for their inherent individual value. When you have personal relationships with people that aren't like you, the stereotypes fall away, and nothing, and I think those are barriers. So socially, that I think is progressing and will continue to progress because the world's getting flatter. People are connecting easier, and we're seeing globalization. So I see more populations shifting around the world, and I think we can't help but be more diverse because there's more mobility and there's more connection. On the flip side, we're attacking power structures that are really embedded. And whenever there's a power structure that's going to lose some of their control or position, they fight back. And I think we see some of that. And I don't know that it's really a diversity issue as much as it is a power issue. The two are hard to separate. But when you have people in power that see a loss coming at their way, they fight back and they use all kinds of strange tactics. So I think we have to be aware of those.
I think we're definitely seeing that here in the US. Kind of a common topic of discussion among our clients. Is there a backlash? How will that affect my work? How will that affect what I'm in? I think my view, and Don, we talked about this, is, progress is never linear. It's never consistent, but it's going to happen. And I think one thing we've leaned into, and again, you and I have spoken about, is really there is an ROI behind diversity and inclusion. It's not about doing it for its own sake. It's about really driving retention, to your point, really driving relationship building, really optimizing your workforce, which sounds cold and calculated, but that's the outcome. So I'm curious, let's talk about how DEI is executed. So I think we've seen for companies that do it for its own sake, you have one set of measures which are not always sustained, but how have you seen how people do DEI in companies? How has that changed?
Well, I think we're starting to realize that education and programs and data are not enough. And I love the adjustments I just saw that you've made around the inclusion tactics that you're presenting to teams, and the walkthrough today of the 3.0 product to me is really reassuring. I think that, again, so I think it's a cycle for me because I started with inclusion before I even knew what DEI was. Like it wasn't really even an acronym when I started my work. And diversity wasn't noticeable because we didn't have the data. Now that you have the data, it became, I think what was happening is there was a lot of reporting and a lot of education, a lot of bias, sort of awareness. but awareness is insufficient to change behavior. I think you actually have to change behavior. And so I think what's going to continue to happen is more and more support for and facilitation for inclusive team rituals and behaviors, and that will lead to real change, because it's sort of a catch-22. If you bring in a mix of people that don't feel safe, and I'll just credit Amy Edmondson for her kind of research around psychological safety. Diverse teams only are more successful when they feel psychologically safe. Otherwise, they fall apart and they get into chaos. And so everybody uses that as the way to say, see, we should all be the same. It's easier. We don't have any conflict. The problem with that is, back to the business ROIs, then you don't have any reason to have 10 people in a room. You should only have one, because you've got a lot of redundancy. And I think it's naturally human to work in groups, and we need to understand the business value of working in a group and show that. And I think that's going to lead us, what, like you said, the ROI of this is that humans are incredibly gifted at natural collaboration, as long as you have inclusive behaviors. If you don't have inclusive behaviors, it doesn't happen. So I think that's really where the focus should be. It's very tactical, it's very business-like, and performance outcomes are better when you can capture the value of a highly diverse team. So to me, that's exactly where it has to go. And I think it is going.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And what a great segue into the topic of the panel, AI, because collaboration truly is an area that AI, it can't, replace. So let's talk about AI. So, again, I love how we started with paper records. So take us back in history. How has technology in the HR tech space changed? What have you seen? And then, subsequently, I'd love to talk about generative AI and where we think it's going.
Yeah, I mean, again, technology, if we just think about what is a computer recognizes patterns with zeros and ones. And we've had computers only, 100 years that are faster than human brains. And I love this book called The Extended Mind by Annie Murphy Paul. If you haven't checked it out, it's really important for, I think, as anyone who works in this space should understand, like, we need to reframe our thinking about what humans are and our idea of how they work. We've got this thing I call the industrial mindset that's been around since, kind of the Industrial Revolution, where people are essentially machines and they're treated that way. And we even think of our brains as, thinking machines inside of our skulls, which is like a box. But really what humans are is collaborative social beings that work really well together to take inputs and discuss them and develop new ideas. And AI is helping us with that. I liken AI to the way we think about walking around. So if our human bodies, we can walk a certain distance, but with a car, we can get there really fast. And right now, nobody's really worried about using a car to get somewhere fast. You wouldn't find someone saying, no way, we're not using cars. We're going to walk. Now there's other, pardon my focus here, but the difference between where we are right now with technology that I saw at the beginning was sort of like we had bicycles and we were using bicycles to drive around, and it's better, but it still required a lot of human effort and it wasn't really that much faster. I think the advent of application-based software, where you can really run programs, processes, and things like that we've seen for the past 5 or 10 years, was sort of like when cars hit super highways and they could drive 80 miles an hour and you could get across the country in a couple of days, or you could, go visit relatives. And it was really comfortable and convenient and easy for everyone. Everyone drives in the US anyway. Now I think we're at a level of like almost a quantum leap where we're talking about like space travel. Not everybody's experienced that yet. It's possible to do. It's hard on us because we're not used to it. And we have to make adaptations and accommodations on how we think about travel. I think AI is at that level, and it will help us do things better if we let it, but we have to rethink what we're supposed to be doing with ourselves. And so I think it actually naturally leads us to a smaller, more diverse team. If you can let AI do the work that we normally crunch ourselves in our heads overnight and try to prepare for meetings and all that, it's a great assistant, and it can help us in so many ways.
I think that's really
rant there, but
that's a great analogy. And I think it's really insightful because there are types of work, like being on, intellectually honest, there are types of work where diversity doesn't really benefit the company at the end of the day. If it really is very systematized, repetitive, it really doesn't, easy to train. It's really not, you don't need that diversity of thought. You don't need that. And that is the kind of work that we see AI as automating. So exactly, it's freeing up resources, it's freeing up people to do more creative, collaborative, social activities. But I want to bring it back. So let's talk about applications. So I think we've got the foundation of AI effectively is speed, the speed to, perform different tasks more quickly, especially if they can be modeled out. But let's talk about how AI is being applied in different tools and products. What are you seeing in the market?
Well, so here's one thing that I really like is a lot of people who want to get better at something are afraid to show that they're not good at something. And when you think about having an interaction, I've watched especially people my generation and older, so maybe this will just age out, but there's this whole concern about saying the wrong thing. And people aren't practiced in how to interact and use the right terminology and be more inclusive just in their phrasing and their word usage and their concepts of people. So having an AI chatbot to talk to, I've been working with Pi and I forget the other one, but they're like counselor based. They have NLP built into them, and they have an understanding of a more empathy around the social structures of what they've captured patterns from counselors and coaches. And I think that makes it easier to scale education and support. And it makes it easier for someone who's really curious to take risks and, again, referencing Amy Edmondson, do the right kind of wrong. You have to kind of practice some of this stuff to get more comfortable with it so that we can be open and inclusive. So there's one idea, is just an AI coach for DEI, for more better inclusive and equitable kind of behaviors. But I think the really bigger opportunities really are around pattern recognition. And as you're pointing out in Diversia's kind of layout, there are patterns we just can't see with our simple kind of human thinking. And when you've got the data across all of the communications in a global organization being captured and analyzed and evaluated, you start to see the patterns really quickly. And then once you can see those patterns, you can start to make better decisions. So I think AI is really, to me, the biggest opportunity for DEI is pattern recognition and showing the kind of insights that you're starting to show with your platform. Because if you can't see them, you just don't know they're there. You may even deny them, but seeing them is believing them.
I could not agree more. I think, spoiler alert, Diversity 4.0 is real-time tracking. It's integrating with communications platforms like, Slack, Teams, etc., email, and identifying those patterns in real time. So, what kind of language is being used, what kind of, whose opinions are being invited, what kind of response rates do you have? So I think, like, from a development perspective, that's where we see AI really influencing our product. We use NLP right now on static data, but what does it look like if you're recognizing patterns in real time and taking action in real time and preventing that, churn, discontent, etc. So I think really interesting. Pi, I'm definitely gonna have to look at. And I'm curious about your experience here. Again, you've really been through it. One thing that we see slow companies down is that fear. It's that fear of saying the wrong thing, not having open, candid discussions, and not feeling like it's a safe space, ironically, to ideate and brainstorm. Is that kind of where you see Pi helping with, like, that sort of tool?
Yeah, I think so, because I think I trust that most people intend to do well and the power thing aside, people will defend their privilege and their position. So that's a separate kind of issue. But in general, I think the average person intends to be nice. Maybe I'm just a hopeless romantic around human behavior, but I think there's a lot of evidence to show that we're designed to collaborate. And so therefore it makes sense that we would have oxytocin and we'd be empathetic and we'd enjoy interactions with others. And when we get like worried that we're going to hurt someone, we back off and we don't use so we get all those negative behaviors. And so when you get into a negative cycle of fear, you can't really be successful. And if this is a way for people to, like, I can tell you just a small anecdote, like the high school where my son goes to school is seriously committed to DEI in ways that a lot of schools just aren't. But I know that the kids there's a lot of fear around things being taken out of context, saying the wrong thing that then gets amplified. So I think having a safe place to practice is a nice thing. Like I don't know if that's the best use, but it's the idea of a counselor and a coach. Think of any other profession, whether it's music or sports or anything like that, they all have coaches and they practice in private. They don't practice, then they play the game. We have to practice live in person in front of colleagues with no prep almost all the time. And I don't think, and communication is critical to good inclusion. So everybody's worried about what they say and how they, write. And I think AI could help with that a lot.
I think it's a really interesting line of thinking around education, behavioral change, and tools and resources to help support that. Such a good point. That we're just throwing people on the field in a pretty high stakes game with no,
Yeah,
no.
you don't get very many chances, especially in today's world of social media and instant connectivity. Somebody who accidentally says the wrong thing, and I know sometimes that reveals actually deeper worrisome beliefs and thoughts. So I'm not defending anyone, but yeah, it can be treacherous. And so therefore people don't engage and they'd rather resist it and say, can't we just get back to when it was simple and I didn't have to worry? And there's a learning cycle there, just to throw out the idea of conscious competence and conscious, there's this thing of consciousness and competence where you can be unconsciously incompetent and think everything's fine. When you become consciously incompetent, you freeze. And so we need to help people get out of that conscious incompetence into conscious competence. And maybe these kinds of tools could help with that.
I think another one, and so interesting, right on point, is we're seeing a number of kind of virtual reality trading platforms. And so I'm not sure if you've kind of come across any of those sorts of tools in your work.
I mean, geez, going all the way back to when when I was at Fidelity Investments, there was this first video-based lab in San Francisco building these, they were totally diversity training tools. That's what's kind of changed over time is those, it was sort of like, how do you have a discussion about conflict? And they had actual actors videotaping, their responses. And it was sort of like choose your own adventure. And it was really clunky. And now you can have, a virtual interaction that seems human on a level that might actually be useful. Those things, I think it's taken 25 years for things to get to a place where the technology is good enough. And there's this whole thing about the uncanny valley and not feeling like it's real and then it's also shutting down. So we have to be careful there, but say there's more work to do. I still believe in the power of authentic relationships. For example, one of the techniques that I used at a enterprise software company was I had global teams come together at an offsite and we built bicycles in partnership with the Boys and Girls Club in San Francisco, as well, East Palo Alto. And so interacting with kids from other cultures and other backgrounds was strikingly powerful to some of these folks who had they just didn't understand the circumstances these kids were living in. And I think those kinds of personal interactions also matter. So if AI can help with that and help people, great. But I still think a personal relationship with someone who's not like you is a faster path to empathy and behavior change.
Right. I love that. But to your point on speed, training and coaching can help you get there quicker, kind of eliminate the friction more quickly, anticipate the reactions. So really, I think you've really run the gamut. So we've got everything from analytics and pattern recognition, data capture, to education, awareness building, coaching, all the way to facilitating, I would say, probably stronger interpersonal relationships. And to bring it back to your point, that's what humans are really good at, and something that yet AI, I have not seen it able to replace. So let me take a step back. And this has been so interesting, John. I know I'm going off script, so thank you.
That's fine. No, it's all good.
Let's talk blue sky. So what to you, you've really worked across a number of companies. What does a really good function look like? Let's call it for a mid-market company, growing quickly. What would you recommend a company, how should they set themselves up for success?
Yeah, and I think that this is similar to the question somebody asked earlier, is where should DEI be? I think, so I'll be a little provocative because I think I was doing this work before DEI was a function. And I think it really starts with, does an executive team understand the human dynamics of their company and how to leverage them? And if they do, then it's obvious from a performance standpoint, from a business standpoint, that diversity is an advantage. So you talk about a strategic advantage of diversity, and there's a business reason why. And I know this isn't so pleasing to everyone out there who's probably thinking, but there's social injustice and all that. So I understand that. But from a business perspective, the function looks like HR is not HR. HR is I call it talent and organization. My acronym is TAO, and that's the essence of the company. If you're a human-centered company, you need to understand humans. And if you understand humans, you're going to naturally be good at inclusion, and therefore you're going to have diversity. And so to me, it's built into how you manage from the very beginning, and it's how the company is set up. That's the blue sky ideal in my mind. And that's what I try to help companies. That's why I started working with startups, because you can do that easier, earlier sometimes. But the business entity has to align with its customer. And if the customer has any consciousness, social consciousness, then the business also has to have social consciousness. So to me, it's core to the culture and management tactics. And therefore the function is, I mean, the natural data you'd provide in any kind of talent profile would include all the kinds of things you're building with Diversio. That would just be a natural component so you can run a great company.
Yeah, I again couldn't agree more. I think to be also provocative, one thing that we recommend to boards who have made diversity a company priority is we want you to challenge the executive team. Every person sitting at that table should be able to explain why. Not we're doing diversity and inclusion because the board said so. What is the business case specifically for us? How will it enhance our products? How will it attract better talent? How will it facilitate innovation? And so I think living in HR, I mean, those are the true heroes. The people who do the work on the ground could not, but really it's gotta, in my mind, really it's gotta come from the top.
Well, I worked at a public company, just to underscore that. The last company I was full-time chief people officer at was a public company, and we created, and thankfully the CEO is a very authentic person, but he also was way beyond his depth in understanding this. And so we hired a coach and two coaches that worked with me to work with our executive team so they could have an authentic answer to the question of what does diversity mean to us here at the company. And it took 2 years, and it was really brutal because they were not ready. Most of them were white men. We had a reasonably diverse executive team. We did have some diversity representation, but it was traditional older executives who just hadn't ever had to answer this question. And so it became a 2-year journey of executive team development to get them to the place where they could answer. They all wanted to have an authentic answer, but they didn't know it. So it was personal growth at a level not a lot of executives will embrace without support. And I think it was driven because the board needed it. So I back to the idea of a bigger company with an external board that's thinking about the long-term health and well-being of the company. This becomes a mandate, and so it forces change, and I think that's important.
Yeah, really interesting. And I think brings me to my next question around what are the biggest challenges that are faced by folks doing the inclusion work in companies? One of them, a lack of knowledge, a lack of articulating the business case. What else are you seeing people struggle with?
Well, being relegated to a department that runs trainings and, brown bags and, it's important work, but if that's all you're doing, it feels a little bit like, you're putting icing on the cake instead of working with the cake, or whatever a better metaphor is. I don't know, but I think that leads to burnout and overwhelm and loneliness and things like that. So again, like I prefer DEI not to be isolated as its own department. I think it's better if it's an initiative shared across, marketing, for example, needs to participate. It should be something owned by the company, not relegated to a department. I think the things that work really well are continued advocacy and brand-based statements and commitments. I like the idea of goals and, measuring. So all of those things are really critical. And so people on the ground doing the work are helping gather the data, report the data, engage with it, and make sure there's dialogue. And I think that takes a lot of work. So it's, thanks to everybody probably on this call, that's what you're doing on a regular basis. It has to continue because it's not built into most companies.
Right. And shameless plug to our next panel. You'll hear from some speakers that are really living and breathing that. So I think Brandy at Disney and, her role really covers both internal DEI and also, what is Disney producing. And Horizon Media, I just met with Trey yesterday, and I know we've got Fatima joining the panel. It's Horizon is all about really making that critical. I think, their chief marketing officer is also their head of DEI. So
Yeah,
I think,
Disney with the content, I mean, it's at the center of Americana. So like the opportunities for working in DEI at Disney must be both over. I can't wait to hear that because that's fascinating. Yeah.
it'll be really some great perspectives. So talk to me about a little bit around, we talked about training and lunches and things like that, but why is data so important in your mind to a successful diversity strategy? DEI rather.
Well, I mean, again, it's back to sort of, I can just give you the 25 years view of like, you couldn't tell except for by walking around in a global company like Citibank or Fidelity or Levi Strauss, unless marketing got involved and was taking photographs and the brand at Levi's was very inclusive from the beginning. They had a personal commitment as a family business to be more of a social movement as a brand. Citibank wasn't that way. It was much more of an operation around banks, and financial stuff. But data allows you to see what you could never see before and to find patterns. And I think the opportunity, like you said, connecting an employee identification number to a demographic wasn't possible before. So data lets us do that. And as we build on HRISs and make them more valuable, this kind of layer where you can report on patterns and see patterns and then use the patterns as ways to experiment about how to run the business better, you just can't do that without data. And there's no accountability without data. You can have people say one thing and do another. If you have a report that has data in it, just like you do with financials, if you're making progress or not. And if you're not making progress, you have to go back. So, and last thing I'll say is the data leads to what's called a boundary object in social social pattern. Oh, what am I thinking of? Sociology. Sorry. Boundary objects are ways for people with different perspectives to share something. At IDEO, we call it a prototype. So if you put a prototype of something physically on the table, all the different people could look and react at it in their own way. And data lets you do that. It lets you keep the same perspective without it being spun into a story yet. It precedes the story. And then we have to make meaning of it, but you can have more meanings made of the data if the data is available. So
Right.
critical.
Makes sense. So let's talk, you're a candid guy. So let's talk about elephant in the room. We have seen a backlash against diversity and inclusion as a topic. What's your perspective here? What's the go forward? Will this continue? Will it change how work is done? Is it something that is a flash in the pan? Where do we go from here?
It's definitely not a flash in the pan, in my opinion. It is the natural force of humanity moving forward. And it's happened for generations. And for most people who are from underrepresented groups, I'm sure it's way too slow. It always is too slow. I mean, just look at the timeline of any kind of social transformation over the past couple thousand years. It's been super slow. But we are in a vertical change curve right now where, because of technology and connectivity, things are moving way faster. And so the backlash I think we're seeing is a bit of future shock from some people who weren't expecting to have to change their own behavior. They were just going to live their life the way they were, and now they've been disrupted. I can tell you, I'll be super candid. I'm a chief people officer who is a white male. For me to get a job in a company as a chief people officer is nearly impossible right now, because most executive teams need to hire for underrepresented players. And when it comes to HR, it's easier to find people who are not white men like me. So it leads to, I think, progress. But when people feel loss around that progress at a societal level, on a personal level, they fight back. They get angry. They get sad. They get upset because they're losing privilege and they're losing opportunity that they didn't ever perceive before. I think it takes a very unusual person to see it that way and not be angry. So I think there's a lot of people losing power that are frustrated and angry, and some of them still have enough power that they can make a lot of noise. But history has shown us that as progress moves on, those pockets go away. And if you look at a global scale just around education and democracy, another really great book is Why Nations Fail. That's a huge economic, huge book, but it talks about this. Historically, we're on the right path. And I think we'll see fewer pockets of resistance and more acceptance. And generationally, it's gonna happen faster and faster.
Right. I mean, obviously, I share your view. I think for me, what really trends in favor of this continued momentum is the impact on performance. Like, truly, if companies succeed, employers succeed, employees succeed, and you just can't deny a bigger talent pool, more people working more productively, ultimately, that's self-interest.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So I know we wanted a little bit of time for Q&A, but first I wanted to ask you if you could tell us about something that you're working on that you're excited about.
Well, one of the things I've been working on lately is with another startup called Quan, Quan. They're a pre-series A company that's building a platform to allow teams to work together around healthy rituals. And they call it well-being, but it's inclusion to me. And what they've got is this really cool platform that lets you take a pre and post team survey of using their assessment for personal and home. And then the platform allows you to share the data as a small group and then develop and then it prompts you with ideas similar to your cards around what you could do to maybe interact differently. And then you can track that and see how it works over time. So it's a very, very practical platform. And I've been a part of a pilot at one of their clients, and it's been going really well. People are really soaking it up. So it's kind of cool.
Love it. I wonder if someone from the Versio team could link Quan's website and then maybe Pi's website for anyone that wants to check them out. I know I'll certainly be having a look.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, so we are getting some Q&A. One of them I think is really interesting. I do want to tackle around, let's talk about bias in AI. So in the development of AI, that's been I'm sure that you have thoughts there.
Well, I meant to bring that up before, but I got off on some other tangent, so I didn't want to talk too long. But I think that's critical, and it's really important because if you have a bunch of, I don't mean to be, I'm just going to say it in my frank way. If a bunch of 25-year-old white guys are developing the algorithms aren't going to be properly sensitive to the things they need to be, and they're not going to be designed in ways that, so they amplify the bias. And I'm really worried about that. I think I've seen some really cool groups kind of advocating for their inclusion in technology, I don't know, building opportunities. But it's a really difficult problem because if you go back to computer science classes in college, they don't feel very inclusive. So I've actually sat through classes where I was like, well, no wonder women are bailing on this class. This feels like a bunch of like weird stuff going on here. So I think this is a really difficult problem to solve. And the more companies can create space for underrepresented groups to participate in the design of AI, the better. So it's a huge problem. And I'm not sure how to solve that one.
I think it's so interesting, and especially with generative AI, like there's a lot of black box, going into, there's, 3 or 4 companies that kind of own the models right now. But I think we were actually interviewed for Miami AI and Data Week, which happened last week. And they created a case study on how we developed our initial NLP tool. And we kind of honestly inadvertently stumbled into a pretty inclusive process. And I think our goal is, people, not that we definitely did not do it perfectly, but it can be done. And for us, it was like put together that first step of reading through data and starting to train the model, that very first basic step of like collecting a data set and analyzing it. The people who do that should come from very different backgrounds.
Absolutely.
So we were kind of we had no funding at that point. So we were like, we'll pay anyone from anywhere, anything. And so we kind of went globally. We had interns from different regions that we had hired to come and do some of this work. We didn't go to computer science schools. We just went. And we ended up with a team of about 20 people from all over the world, different genders, different races, different backgrounds, training the model. And it was really interesting because we initially set out to identify pain points. You saw some of that in the dashboard. And the way that people describe harassment, for example, in colloquial language, it's very, and if you don't have people who can identify that, you end up literally training it to speak one language.
Yeah.
So not that that's like the perfect approach, but that for us, that was like at the very basic ground level, get people in there to parse the data.
Wonderful. That's really great to hear. And that's why I think we're at the very infancy right now. And I'm not too worried. I guess because as companies like yours do their own building, it will continue to diversify the opportunities for people to use different. AI is not a singular thing. It doesn't have to be, and I don't think it will be. But we're really early right now, so it's a little scary.
Yeah, no, it's quite interesting. I'm reading through some more of these questions. So I think there's one from Danette around how Diversio accounts for capturing and measuring intangibles. So I think that's really quite interesting. So again, a lot of that, and I am excited about AI and NLP and the ability to quantify what typically was qualitative data. But that is a process. Really defining, like for us, even defining inclusion, that took years, and it took a lot of expertise and a lot of people contributing to like what is the intangible factor. Is it culture? Is it mentorship? Is it flexibility? So I don't have a great answer. I think, Janet, I love the question. I don't have a great answer, but I think it will be an ongoing process. And I'm wondering, John, if you have any insight that you would share there.
Can you clarify the question again? I don't think I quite understood what the question was.
I think that, so the question is around measuring intangibles.
Oh, intangible.
So qualitative kind of, what people bring to an organization that's not necessarily I closed X deal worth X amount of money.
Okay, I love that. Yeah, so I think personally, I think that for a long time, we've been relegated to things like soft skills and things that were hard to quantify. So they're called intangibles. But I think with the power of computing, growing and growing and growing, we now realize these are patterns. I don't think there's an infinite number of human behaviors. There's not an infinite number of facial pattern. We're starting to use computers to recognize expressions. So what we used to not know our brains were perceiving, we can now find in patterns and have computers take care of. So I think the word intangible will go away, honestly. I think it will get to a place where we can quantify human behavior using much more powerful pattern recognition than we ever have before. We're not there yet. But, and then things like, I don't think culture is intangible. I've been working with culture for 25 years. It's not intangible. And it's a finite set of things you can mess with. It's just, people haven't had the time or energy to focus on it, and computers will help us with that.
Right. And I think it brings it back. It's so important to have diverse individuals involved in quantifying the qualitative, because, as we know, there's so much undervalued work that, not only women, but often women do in organizations that make them run. And in my mind, we need to bring that front and center and make sure that that is valued, because it really is so critical.
Yeah.
We have 1 minute left. I do want to clarify, I should never, defend yourself on a panel, but my question was actually, do you think the backlash is a flash in the pan? In my mind, I think not. I deny it for all.
Well, I think the backlash is to be expected, and anytime you're managing change, you have to embrace the idea, and maybe you can even get as far as empathize with the idea that there's going to be backlash. And as long as you expect it, you can manage it. And that's why we need to work together in groups like this. And you've got your community of change makers. Like, you can't deal with it alone. You can get whacked. I've been whacked a bunch of times in companies, and it doesn't feel good. And so you want to have a team, and you want to be able to handle any kind of, resistance that you might get. But I think it's to be expected, but it's not going to stay.
Yeah, I think very pragmatic viewpoint. Fantastic. Well, is there anything else, John? This has been so interesting, and I always really enjoy talking to you. Is there anything else that, any other points or comments that you wanted to share before we wrap up here?
I'll just say I appreciate what Diversio is working on and your leadership, as well as everybody who's on the call today to commit the time to this. This is a group of people that are, I feel very appreciative of the fact that this is even happening today. So thanks for having me, and good luck, and hang in there.
Thank you so much. It's a real privilege.
All right.
Fabulous. Okay, on to the next panel. So I will bid you goodbye, John. Again, really appreciate your time, and thanks everyone who asked questions on the in the chat.